Hi, uh, a very good evening. Uh, we are resuming our session again, and though we took a long break uh, due to personal issues and due to some problems and due to time management, we took this long break, and now again we are resuming the session and the course of British history. Previously, we had talked about the merits and demerits of the Whig Party, and today we will talk about uh, the very interesting personality of the British history. And the personality is very well known, and he is also the first Prime Minister of the Britain, and he has also the credit of developing the cabinet system of government in England. And of course, we are talking about Robert Walpole. Robert Walpole, who was born in 1676 and died in 1745. In this meantime, he remained prime minister for 20 years or more than 20 years because his first tenure when he was made prime minister, it was in 1721, and then he remained on the post of premiership till 1742 after a defeat in Jenkins' Ear War. We will talk about his career, his characters, his policies, and specifically his foreign policy, his domestic policy, and his colonial policy, as well as his fall at the end, how he failed and how he resigned at the end. Uh, we will talk about all the aspects of the policies which Robert Walpole had adopted. First, let's have a glance over his career. And he was born in 1676, sorry, and he had 19 brothers and sisters. He succeeded the business of his father. His father was a businessman and very well off at that time. In 1708, he became Secretary of War. Prior to this joining, he had joined the Whig Party, and he remained the member of Whig Party. Uh, yes, and he was made PM in 1721 and remained as PM till 1742. So this is just a brief glance over his career. Now coming to the character of Robert Walpole. First and importantly, Walpole was humorous and intelligent man. He was also very fond of hunting and had packs Saturday as his hunting day. He used to say, and this saying of him is very famous: I threw off my clothes when I threw up my cares when I threw up my clothes. So this shows that he had all the weaknesses of that of 18th century men. Secondly, he never felt enthusiastic about anything. He never thought of achieving any ideals in his foreign policy or bringing any reforms for the redress of his people. He never showed up himself to be idealistic or enthusiastic. He was a calm and patient leader, and he wasn't enthusiastic about any achievement. Though is the leaders of his time, they were. Walford had no instinct of revenge or jealousy. This is very, mm, we can say, the a great character of his personality, that he had no instinct of revenge and jealousy. How? In this way, he could bear patiently his criticism, and he had no kind of feelings of revenge, and would not give jealousy to anybody. So this makes him is a great leader. He was staunch Whig. Staunch Whig means he was staunch follower of the Whig party, and he was the member of a hardcore member of the Whig party, and he was a sincere follower of his party. He could not appoint comparatively able people under him. This was another cunning type of character of his personality, that he could not appoint comparatively able person under him. And he could understand a man's nature and his weakness with a wink of eye. And he is generally described as the drill sergeant of his party. Drill sergeant mean checking the discipline, the principles, the rules, regulation. So this all he was for this all he was labeled as the drill sergeant. And fifthly, he was against revolutionary reforms, and he used to say, "Let the sleeping dogs lie." And his chief aim was to maintain peace and uh, order, peace and order, make the country prosperous, and to keep away from the internal affairs of the people. So he would not interfere the least in the personal life of the people. And the prime aim of Robert Walpole was to maintain peace and order in the country. So this is all about his characters of Walpole, and now we will talk about his home policies of Robert Walpole. Walpole's policy was peace abroad and prosperity at home. Peace abroad means to remain in a kind of friendly relationship with other countries and to avoid wars, while prosperity at home to have to economic prosperity, political prosperity, or these all we can say stability. So prosperity at home and peace at abroad means that all. So his home policy. First, we will talk about the steps that he uh, uh, taken for the political development of England. So in political developments, we will talk about those policies and measures that he has taken, and then we will come step by step to other policies and other departments. Steps taken by the political development of England. What were the steps? The first one is following the policy of expediency. Expediency means he believed in policy of moderation. He never goes against the public opinion. He wanted to repeal the trading charter of Edinburgh, but the opposition in the parliament made him withdraw the bill. He was in a kind of uh, he believed in policy of moderation because he thought that too many reforms and changes might arouse the people and prompt them to revolutionary methods. And his very famous dictum was let the sleeping dogs lie. So he would not incite the people or provoke the people by taking such reforms or such initiatives that, of course, in a kind of play with the emotions of the subjects or with the people. So thus he adopted the policy of moderation or expediency. Secondly, in the political development, second step that he took was the strengthening the foundation of the Hanabarian dynasty. And you also know that we had talked about the Hanabarian dynasty or the Hanabarian succession. We had a lecture over this topic. Uh, Steps that are the foundation of the Hanabarian dynasty, how it was strengthened. He maintained peace in the country so that the Jacobites might not raise their heads, and as such, the Hanoverian kings might find a complete recognition of their accession. Uh, so the Hanoverian that comes after the Stouts, the Judge One, Judge Two, and so on, and the Stouts, those who were ruling before George One, and there is of course William and Mary, those are known as Stouts, while the Jacobites, those the pretenders of the James 1 and James 2 are the followers are the of James 1 and James 2. In this formation or strengthening of the Hanoverian dynasty, he left no stone unturned, and he took every step to establish the Hanoverian dynasty. So the second important policy was strengthening the Hanoverian dynasty. And thirdly, adding to the significance of the House of Commons. Many times he was offered a seat in the House of Lords, yet never accepted. He made a precedent prime minister should always remain as a member of the lower house. He was offered a seat in the House of Lords. It, in today's world, currently we call it a senator. In various countries like in Pakistan and some European countries as well as in America, we call it senator, the House of Lords. Earlier, they were called the House of Lords, and today's word it is known as the senator. He was offered that seat as well many a time, but he uh, politely rejected and remained as the PM while having the seat of House of Commons. Thus, the House of Commons significantly, or their significance was aroused while remaining on this seat, helping the evolution of the cabinet system. And this is the credit of this goes to Robert Walford, that he evolved the cabinet system of government in England, and we had detailed discussion on this topic in the previous lectures. Judge 1 did not know, and even Judge 2 did not know English and English customs, and thus the affairs of the states, was left at the hands of the person who is more able and comparatively could chair the meetings. So he was in charge of the meetings and would chair the meetings. And the kings of that time, Judge 1 and Judge 2, they were uh, they they were ignorant of the English language, the rituals, the English customs. So thus, the person who is chairing the meeting, and who would chair the meeting, the person who is more able and can communicate with people, or with the members of the House of Common. So he would chair the meeting, and the person later on known as the prime minister, and thus the post was prime ministership was created at that time. Work done for the economic developments of the country. So This is the second important policy. And Walpole encouraged trade and made the country rich and prosperous. How? Firstly, in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, we talked about four important points. Now, in the economic sphere, we are going to talk about some important steps that that are taken by by Robert Walpole. So he decreased the rate of tax on some of the articles. In this way, the consumption of these articles and their sale increased, and economic condition of the country began to impose. So taxation was forgiven, and most people were absolved of certain excessive taxation. Secondly, sinking fund was established in the country by repaying the national debt. Sinking fund was a fund which was envisioned or formed for a kind of situation or for emergency. If the this was a fund formed by periodically setting aside money for the gradual repayment of a department or replacement of wasting assets. If if any spare of the life got bankrupt, so definitely this fund will help and will repay on their behalf. And thirdly, the property of the director of the South Sea Company was acquired and sold. The money was given to the shareholder, to the shareholder who was having share in the same company. This company, as we talked in the previous lecture, got bankrupted due to certain fluctuation of that time, and this company was later on sold, and the money was given to the shareholders. Walpole allowed the English colonies to have direct trade relation with with other colonies freely. So the colonies now could really have kind of relation with other colonies of Britain. The Navigation Act was not imposed with vigor, and thus the colonies greatly gained and trade. So this was kind of laws that was imposed by the British on the colonies on the trade of the on the trade of colonies, and all trade between England and colonies to be carried out in England in English port. Now this same act was not imposed with strictness, and he also got encouraged the various industries of of the country and gave them financial assistance from the government. For the benefit of the tea and coffee dealer, he started the bond system, which stopped the imposition of tax on the ports. So these were certain effective measures that he took for the economic development of the country. Now, how was his religious policy? And of course, he adopted a middle path in the religious policy. He was in favor of repealing all the restrictions imposed on the dissenters due to the opposition of the church. He did not repeal the Test Act and the Corporation Act. And he also passed the Indemnity Act every year, by which all the fines for not attending the church were remitted. So his religious policy there was quite flexible, and he would pass Indemnity Act. Indemnity Act, under this act, the person who is charged by not following religious rituals would be forgiven, would be absolved the men. The men would be absolved of all those charges. And on the other hand, the dissenters, the Corporation Act and the Test Act, that was that certain restriction that was imposed on the dissenters. So he was also in a mood to repeal all those acts, but due to the pressure of the cabinet, he could not remove or repeal those restrictions. Now coming to the foreign policy of Robert Walpole. His foreign policy was based on the principle, let the sleeping dogs lie. He used to call wars fighting of dogs for bones, and he avoided wars during 20 years of his regime. He was deadly against wars. In the start of the lecture, we talked that his aim was to have peace abroad and prosperity at home. Friendship with France, this was his policy, and he wanted to remain friendly with France in order to protect the Treaty of Utrecht. And we talked about the Treaty of Utrecht, or how this treaty was signed, why this treaty was signed, what were the conditions of this treaty. We talked about this treaty in detail in the previous lecture. Uh, Spain besieged Gibraltar in order to develop her trade with Austria and Mediterranean countries, but Walpole avoided the war by signing the Treaty of Hanover with France and Russia. So, Spain, of course, provoked England to on war, but Walford avoided this war, and thus the war could not take place between France and England. And of course, France at this time was in alliance with Spain. So, though Spain was uh, going against the provisions of the treaty, but due to remain in peace, while Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister of England, he avoided a war with France and Spain. War of Polish succession, which is also known as Poland. Russia and Austria wanted to keep Poland as a weak power. So both Austria and Russia wanted to keep Poland as a weak power, while France supported the succession of a candidate of Poland. France demanded the help of England for their candidate, but Walpole did not like to take part in any sort of war. The war was fought between France, Spain, and Austria, while England was kept out of the war. So here again, England was kept out of the war. Thus, Robert Walpole kept out his country out of the wars. And War of Jenkins' year with Spain, and we have a special lecture on this war in the previous and the playlist. You can search and go for that lecture, the Jenkins Ear War, why this war was fought, what were the reasons, what were the results, and then at the end a treaty was reached, what were the provisions of that treaty. So we have a detailed lecture on this topic. Now coming to the colonial policy of Robert Walpole. Walpole's colonial policy was that of peace, tolerance, and of the middle path. He interfered in the colonial affairs the least. He could not interfere in the colonial policy, colonial affairs. He could interfere rather very least. He did not allow strict enforcement of the Navigation Act, and the Navigation Act that all the trade from the colonies shall take place on the English ports. And these were the laws in the Navigation Act imposed by British on her colonies. But now this act was not vigorously and strictly imposed on his colonies. The colonies were forbidden forbidden to smelt copper themselves, but they ordered to send all copper ore to England for smelting. Hat manufacturing was also forbidden to the colonies, and the copper, were the raw materials that were forbidden for the colonies to be manufactured or to be converted into polish or repalmed. So these were prohibited, or those were forbidden for the colonies, and even hat manufacturing, it was also forbidden to the colonies. Uh, this way, uh, Robert Walpole safeguarded England's trade and colonial interest. So he also engaged the colonies, and he also promoted the English trade, and thus he remained victorious throughout in his 20 years of reign. Now, coming to the fall of Robert Walpole, how he resigned and how he defeated. Uh, During the Jenkins Ear War in 1740, he got defeated, and Walpole never paid uh, any attention to the colonies and the naval power, to the colonies in the naval power, nor provide sufficient funds for the wars. So he ignored the navy. He ignored the colonies. Rather, he interfered the least. And the colonies of that time, there was, of course, a soft target for the other great powers like France and Austria, and they could come and and acquire the colonies. Thus, he ignored the colonies. He ignored the naval power, and of course, at that time, a country could be superior only because of its navy. So he also ignored the navy, and he could not provide sufficient funds for the navies, because at that time the trade would take place through seas, and of course all the communication that would take place through sea. Thus, but that safeguard of of that communication, supreme navy is inadvertible. So in 1742, he failed to get a majority of votes, and thus his ranks and his grip got down in the public, and thus he failed to regain majority of votes. He resigned, and Judge 2 did not allow him to resign, but he remained stuck to his decision. Judge 2 then honored him as the Earl of Oxford and gave him annual pension of around £4,000. So the Earl of Oxford, that was a kind of award, or that was a kind of honor to him. In the Earl of Oxford means a warrior or a nobleman. So, and then in 1745 he died. So this is all about the Robert Walpole, his policies, his careers, his characters. And if there is any question, you must ask. So thank you so much for watching the video.